Fiancé overheard me calling my ex the best bad boy lover. Now he's destroyed my life, and karma hit. All right, so here's how everything went south. We had a bunch of friends over at our place. Nothing fancy, just a chill night. Some people were in the living room watching Lord of the Rings. Others were in the dining room playing cards. It was one of those nights where everyone kind of splits into smaller groups, and the vibe was super relaxed. You know how it goes, different conversations happening in different corners, everyone just doing their thing. I was in the kitchen with my friend Jess. We were catching up on life, random stuff, and somehow we ended up talking about past relationships. It wasn't like we planned to get into anything heavy, it just happened naturally. You're sitting there talking about life, and before you know it, you're spilling your guts about things you didn't even think mattered anymore. Now here's the thing. I had no idea Jason was nearby. I thought he was still playing cards with the guys. So when Jess brought up the topic of best relationships or whatever, I didn't think twice before answering. I mean, we were just chatting, harmless, right? Or so I thought. Jess asked me, "Do you ever think about your exes? Like who is the best in certain areas?" She didn't say it in a weird way or anything, just like a casual question between friends. I laughed it off at first, but then because I was in that comfort zone with her, I answered honestly. And that's when I said it. Jason is great, but he'll never be the lover that Bill was. I told her, leaning back in my chair like it was the most normal thing to say. It's not fair to him, though. Bill was just really gifted down there. The second those words left my mouth, I didn't think much of it. Jess chuckled, and we were about to move on to another topic when she froze. Her eyes darted past me, and I could feel the air in the room shift. I turned my head slightly, and there he was, Jason, standing in the doorway. My heart dropped. I don't know how much he heard, but judging by the look on his face, it was enough. Enough to make me wish I could rewind time, take back what I said, or maybe even just disappear altogether. You know that feeling when you've been caught saying something you know you shouldn't have? Multiply that by 1,000. Jason didn't say anything. He just stood there for a second, like he was deciding whether to walk in or walk away. He finally cleared his throat and stepped into the kitchen, heading straight for the fridge. "Hey, need anything?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like nothing was wrong. My voice felt shaky, though. I could see Jess giving me that "oh crap" look from across the table. "Nah, just grabbing some sodas," he replied, barely looking at me. His tone was flat, not his usual easygoing self. He grabbed a couple of cans and left without another word. Jess and I sat there in awkward silence for what felt like forever. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think he heard?" "I don't know," I muttered, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the look on his face. There was something in his eyes, like disappointment, mixed with confusion. I wanted to believe he didn't catch the whole thing, that maybe he just walked in on the tail end and didn't put the pieces together. But deep down, I knew better. After that, I couldn't focus on the conversation anymore. Just tried to change the subject, but my brain was stuck on replay, going over every word I said, every facial expression Jason made. I kept picturing him walking back to the card game, wondering if he was sitting there thinking about what he'd just heard. The rest of the night was a blur. I went back to the living room eventually, but my heart wasn't in it. I laughed at the right moments, chimed in when I was supposed to, but inside I was freaking out. Every time I glanced at Jason, he seemed fine, but there was this undercurrent of tension. I could feel it, even if he wasn't showing it. When everyone finally left, and it was just the two of us, I thought about bringing it up. I wanted to ask if he heard anything to clear the air, but I chickened out. What if I brought it up and made things worse? What if he really didn't hear it all, and I ended up spilling the beans myself? I convinced myself to wait, hoping that if he did hear, he'd bring it up first. Spoiler alert, he didn't. That night, lying in bed next to him, the guilt was eating me alive. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering why I even said it in the first place. I didn't mean to compare them, it just slipped out. Bill was in the past, Jason was my future. But how could I explain that without making it sound like I was settling? I stare at the ceiling, listening to Jason's steady breathing, trying to figure out what to do. I wanted to reach over, to touch him, to say something, anything to make it right. But I froze. What if he pulled away? What if he was lying there, pretending to be asleep, just as torn up as I was? The whole situation felt like this giant, invisible wall had gone up between us, and I had no clue how to tear it down. By morning, nothing had changed. Jason got up, got ready, and left for work like normal. No words, no confrontation, just silence. And I stayed there, sitting on the edge of the bed, wondering if we'd ever be able to go back to how things were before that night in the kitchen. So after that awkward night, I could tell something was really off with Jason. He wasn't acting like himself at all. Normally we're super comfortable around each other, talking, joking, whatever. But now it was like I was living with a stranger. He barely looked at me, didn't initiate any conversations. And when I tried to talk, his responses were short, like he wasn't interested. At first I thought, maybe he was just tired or stressed from work. I mean, everyone has those days, right? But this felt different. It was like there was this wall between us, and I had no idea how to break through it. Every time I tried to get close, he'd pull away. He wasn't mean or anything, just distant. And that hurt more than I expected. I kept replaying that stupid comment I made in the kitchen, wondering how much he actually heard. Did he catch the whole thing? Just the tail end? I was dying to know, but I didn't have the guts to ask. I thought maybe if I just let it go, it would blow over. Big mistake. The silence between us was brutal. I'd be in the middle of cooking dinner, and he'd walk in, grab a drink, and walk right back out without a word. Normally he'd sit there, chat with me about his day, or just hang out. But now nothing. It was like living with a ghost. I felt like every move I made was being judged, even though he wasn't saying anything. It was all in my head, but it felt so real. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, calling friends, anything to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But no matter what I did, the tension was there. Every time we were in the same room, it was suffocating. I started overanalyzing every little thing. Was he giving me the cold shoulder on purpose? Did he want me to bring it up? Or was he hoping I'd pretend like nothing happened? I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to test the waters. One night, I suggested we watch a movie together, thinking maybe if we spent some time like we used to, things would feel normal again. He agreed, but it was like pulling teeth. We sat on the couch, but instead of cuddling up like usual, he stayed on his side, arms crossed. I could feel the distance between us, and it was killing me. Halfway through the movie, I turned to him and asked, "Is everything okay? You've been kind of quiet lately." It took everything in me to keep my voice steady, to act like I wasn't freaking out inside. He didn't look at me right away. When he finally did, he gave me this half-hearted smile and said, "Yeah, just tired." Tired, really? That's all he had to say? I knew there was more to it, but I didn't want to push. Not yet, at least. I nodded and went back to watching the movie, even though I couldn't focus on a single thing happening on the screen. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what my next move should be. A few days later, I thought, maybe I need to be more proactive. I started making an effort to show him how much I cared. I'd leave little notes for him to find, make his favorite meals, and just try to be there without being overbearing. But nothing seemed to work. He'd thank me, sure, but it was like there was no real emotion behind it. It was like he was just going through the motions. The worst part was when I tried to be affectionate. I'd reach for his hand, and he'd pull away, not in a mean way, but like he just didn't want to be touched. Every time it happened, it felt like another stab to the heart. I couldn't help but think, was this it? Were we broken beyond repair? One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was going on in his head, even if it meant opening up a can of worms. So while we were getting ready for bed, I turned to him and said, "Jason, I feel like there's something you're not telling me. Did I do something wrong?" He looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was going to spill everything. But instead, he just shook his head and said, "No, everything's fine." Everything's fine? That was his answer? I felt like screaming. How could he say everything was fine when it was so clearly not? But I didn't push. I just nodded and crawled into bed, feeling more confused and hurt than ever. That night, I barely slept. I kept tossing and turning, thinking about all the things I could have done differently. Maybe if I kept my mouth shut in the kitchen, none of this would be happening. Maybe if I was better at communicating, we wouldn't be stuck in this weird limbo. The next day, I decided to give him some space. Maybe he needed time to process whatever was going on. I went about my day, trying not to let the weight of everything crush me. But as the hours dragged on, I realized I couldn't keep going like this. We needed to talk, really talk. But how do you bring up something like this without making it worse? That evening, I made dinner, hoping we could sit down and have a normal conversation. But as soon as Jason walked through the door, I knew it wasn't going to happen. He was quiet, distant, and barely touched his food. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words got caught in my throat. By the time we finished eating, I was at my breaking point. I cleared the dishes, trying to keep it together. But inside, I was a mess. I felt like we were on the edge of a cliff, and I had no idea how to pull us back. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. Something had to give, and soon. I just hoped that when it did, we'd be able to come out the other side, still holding on to each other. But deep down, I wasn't sure if we could. So the night everything finally blew up started like any other, tense and awkward. Jason was doing his usual thing of barely saying 2 words to me, and I was trying my best not to completely lose it. I couldn't take the silence anymore, but I didn't know how to break it without making things worse. Still, I knew it was now or never. We couldn't keep tiptoeing around each other like this. After dinner, we were sitting on a couch, both pretending to watch some random show on TV. I couldn't focus on a single thing happening on the screen. My mind was racing, trying to find the right way to bring it up without making him shut down. But how do you even start a conversation like that? Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I muted the TV and turned to him. "Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to talk to you." He didn't look at me right away, just kept staring at the darkened screen like he was hoping I'd change my mind. After what felt like an eternity, he finally sighed and turned his head slightly. "What's up?" he asked, his tone flat, almost resigned. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "I feel like there's been something wrong between us, and I need to know what's going on. You've been so distant, and I'm worried." For a moment, he didn't say anything, just sat there, his jaw tight. Then he finally spoke. "You really don't know?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew exactly what he was talking about, but hearing him say it made my stomach twist. I tried to play dumb, hoping maybe we could talk about it without diving into the specifics. "I mean, I've noticed you've been acting differently. If I did something to upset you, I wish you'd just tell me." Jason gave a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You did something all right." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it. He was going to bring up the kitchen incident, and there was no way I could talk my way out of it. "Jason, what did I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He finally looked me in the eye, and I could see the hurt there, the pain I had caused without even realizing it. "I heard what you said," he admitted, his tone sharper now. "That night in the kitchen with Jess, I heard everything." My heart dropped. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. He actually heard. I felt sick. "Jason, I didn't mean," he cut me off, his eyes narrowing. "Don't lie to me, Mel. You meant it. You don't just say something like that unless it's true." I shook my head, feeling tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "I swear it wasn't like that. I was just talking. It didn't mean anything." He scoffed, leaning back on the couch. "Didn't mean anything? You told your friend, 'I'll never be as good as your ex.' How the hell am I supposed to feel about that?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach out to make him understand that it was a stupid, thoughtless comment, but I could see the damage was already done. Jason, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. You think sorry fixes this? He snapped, his voice rising. Do you have any idea what it feels like to hear the person you're planning to marry say they'll never measure up to someone else? I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Jason, please, it was a dumb comment. I wasn't thinking. You're the one I love, not him. He stood up, pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. That's not the point, Mel. You didn't just say he was better in some random way. You said I'll never be as good in bed. How do I come back from that? How do we come back from that? I stood up too, desperate to make him see that we could fix this. Jason, it was a mistake. I shouldn't have said it, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. He turned to face me, his eyes cold. How do you think I feel now, Mel? Every time I'm with you, all I'm going to think about is how I'm not good enough, how you're comparing me to him. I reached out, but he stepped back, keeping the distance between us. Jason, please, I know I screwed up, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. He shook his head, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. I don't know if you can, Mel. I don't know if I can get past this. That broke me. I felt like I was losing him right in front of my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Jason, I love you. Please don't let this ruin everything we've built together. He sighed, looking away. I need some time to think. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Okay, take all the time you need. Without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the muted TV, the weight of everything crashing down on me. How'd we get here? How did one stupid comment turn into this? I knew we had a long road ahead, but I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I just hope Jason felt the same way. After Jason walked out that night, I just sat there, staring at the empty room. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I'd screwed up big time, but what could I say that I hadn't already? Every time I opened my mouth, it felt like I was making things worse. The next day, I woke up early, hoping to talk to Jason before he left for work. But when I got up, he was already gone. He hadn't even touched the breakfast I made for him. My heart sank. It was like he was avoiding me on purpose, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. I spent the rest of the day replaying everything in my head, trying to think of how to fix it. When he finally came home that evening, I was ready to apologize again, to really lay it all out there. But the second he walked in, I could tell he wasn't in the mood to talk. He looked exhausted, emotionally drained. Still, I knew I couldn't let another day go by without addressing it. Jason, can we talk? I asked softly, trying not to sound too pushy. He sighed, dropping his bag by the door. I don't know, Mel. I'm just tired. I know, I said quickly. I need to say something, and then you can go rest if you want. He looked at me for a moment, like he was deciding whether or not to listen. Finally, he nodded and sat down on the couch. I sat across from him, my hands fidgeting in my lap. I'm really sorry, I started, my voice trembling a bit. I know I hurt you, and I hate that I did. Well, I said that night, it was stupid and careless. I wasn't thinking, and I never meant for you to hear that. Jason didn't say anything, just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I swallowed hard, trying to push through the nerves. I love you, Jason. You mean everything to me, and the last thing I ever wanted was to make you feel like you're not enough, because you are. You're more than enough. He allowed a bitter laugh. You really expect me to believe that after what you said? I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't know, I need you to know how sorry I am. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. All I can do is try to make it right. Jason leaned back, rubbing his face with his hands. Mel, it's not just about the words. It's what they mean. You said I'll never be as good as him. How am I supposed to feel about that? Every time we're together, that's all I'm going to think about. I know, I whispered, my heart breaking. I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you. He sat there for a long moment, then finally spoke. I don't know if I can get past this. I want to, but I don't know how. Hearing him say that felt like a knife to the heart, but I knew I couldn't give up. Maybe we can figure out together, I suggested. We could talk to someone, get some help. I don't want this to be the end of us. Jason sighed again, looking away. I don't know, Mel. I need time to think. I nodded, wiping away a tear. Take all the time you need. Just please don't shut me out. He didn't respond, just stood up and headed to the bedroom. I sat there on the couch, feeling helpless. I hated that I had put us in this situation. I hated that one careless comment had caused so much damage. The next few days were rough. Jason was still distant, and every interaction felt strained. I kept trying to show him that I cared. Small gestures like making his favorite meals or leaving notes for him, but nothing seemed to get through. It was like he had built this wall around himself, and I couldn't find a way in. One night, we were sitting in the living room again, both lost in our own thoughts. I finally worked up the courage to speak. Jason, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. He looked at me, his eyes tired. Yeah? I nodded. I realized now that it wasn't just about the words. It's about how it made you feel, and I get that. I've been so focused on trying to fix things that I didn't really stop to think about what you're going through. Jason didn't say anything, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. I took a deep breath and continued. I know it's going to take time, and I'm not expecting things to go back to normal overnight. But I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work. He finally spoke, his voice soft. It's not just about time, Mel. It's about trust. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you with how I feel. His words hit me hard, but I knew he was right. Trust was something that had to be rebuilt, and I was willing to put in the work. I understand, I said quietly, and I'm willing to earn that trust back, no matter how long it takes. Jason nodded slowly, his expression still guarded. I guess we'll see. It wasn't the reassurance I was hoping for, but it was a start. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to fight for us. I just hoped Jason would be willing to fight too. After that conversation, I knew we couldn't fix this on our own. No matter how much I apologized or how many times we talked, there was this huge gap between us that words couldn't bridge. So, I brought up the idea of counseling again. I wasn't sure if Jason would go for it, but I figured it was worth a shot. The next evening, while we were both sitting in awkward silence, I finally said, Jason, I've been thinking maybe we should see a counselor, someone who can help us figure this out. He didn't respond right away, just stared at the TV. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. Finally, he turned to me, his expression tired but not angry. I don't know, Mel, what's the point? It's not like a counselor can change what happened. I know, I admitted, but maybe they can help us understand each other better, help us figure out how to move forward. He sighed, rubbing his face. I guess it's worth a try. Hearing that gave me a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't a full-on yes, but it was better than nothing. The next day, I found a local counselor who specialized in couple therapy and booked us an appointment. I didn't know what to expect, but I was willing to do whatever it took to save our relationship. When we walked into the counselor's office for the first session, the atmosphere was tense. Jason was quiet, his arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I couldn't blame him. I felt nervous too. The counselor, a woman named Dr. Taylor, greeted us with a warm smile and invited us to sit. So, she began, "Why don't you tell me what brings you here today?" I hesitated, glancing at Jason. He shrugged, clearly not ready to start. So I took the lead. We've been having some issues with communication and trust, I said carefully. There was an incident a while ago, and it's been hard to move past it. Dr. Taylor nodded, encouraging me to continue. Can you tell me more about this incident? I took a deep breath. Jason overheard me saying something I shouldn't have, something about a past relationship. It hurt him, and I've been trying to fix things ever since. but it's been tough. Jason finally spoke up, his voice low but steady. She didn't just say something, she compared me to her ex, said I'll never be as good as him in bed. Hearing him say it out loud like that made my stomach twist. It sounded even worse than when I thought about it in my head. I glanced at Dr. Taylor, expecting her to be shocked, but she remained calm and professional. "That's a tough thing to hear," she said gently. "Jason, how did that make you feel?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. It felt like a punch to the gut. I've never felt insecure about myself before, but now I can't stop thinking about it. Every time we're together, it's like there's this voice in my head reminding me that I'll never measure up. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. "Jason, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to feel like that." "I know you're sorry," he replied, his tone softer now, "but it doesn't change how I feel." Dr. Taylor nodded. "It sounds like both of you are carrying a lot of pain from the situation. Mel, what do you think needs to happen for Jason to feel secure again?" I thought about it for a moment, choosing my words carefully. "I think we need to rebuild trust. I need to show him that he's the only one I care about, that he's enough for me in every way." Jason scoffed. "It's not that simple. How do you rebuild trust when you feel like it's been shattered?" Dr. Taylor leaned in. "Trust is tricky. It takes time and consistent effort, but it's not impossible. The first step is open communication. Both of you need to be honest about your feelings, even when it's uncomfortable." Jason nodded slowly. "I'm willing to try, but it's hard." "I understand," Dr. Taylor said, "and it's okay to feel that way. What's important is that you're both here, willing to work through this together." The session continued with us discussing our feelings and how we could improve our communication. It was tough. Every word felt heavy, and there were moments where I wanted to shut down, but I knew we had to keep pushing through if we wanted any chance of fixing things. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally drained, but also a bit hopeful. Dr. Taylor gave us some exercises to do at home, like writing down our feelings in a journal and sharing them with each other. It felt a little weird at first, but I was willing to give it a try. Over the next few days, we followed her advice. Every evening we'd sit down and share what we had written. It was awkward at first, but slowly it started to feel more natural. I learned things about Jason's feelings that I hadn't known before, and I hoped he was starting to understand me better too. Our next session was a bit easier. We both opened up more, talking about our fears and hopes for the future. Dr. Taylor guided us through the process, helping us see things from each other's perspective. It wasn't a magical fix, but it felt like we were making progress, little by little. Still, I knew this was just the beginning. We had a long road ahead, and there would be more tough conversations to come. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like we had a fighting chance. The breaking point came on a night that felt like every other. The days were blurring together, tense silences, awkward conversations, and the constant feeling that I was walking on eggshells around Jason. I was clinging to the hope that counseling would eventually help us, but deep down, I could feel the cracks widening. That night, we were both sitting in the living room again. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. Jason was scrolling on his phone, and I was pretending to be interested in whatever show was playing. The atmosphere was heavy, like a storm that had been brewing for weeks, and I could tell something was about to give. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to him, even if it meant opening up another painful conversation. "Jason," I said softly, breaking the silence. "Can we talk?" He didn't look up right away, just sighed and put his phone down on the coffee table. "About what?" he asked, his voice tired. "About us," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "I feel like we've been stuck, and I don't know how to move forward." He finally turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and frustration. "Mel, I don't know if there's anything left to say. We've been over this so many times, and nothing's changed." "I know," I said quickly, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, but I need to understand where you're at, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know what to do. Jason leaned back, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what to tell you, Mel. I've tried to get past it, I really have, but every time I look at you, I hear those words in my head. I hear you saying that I'll never be as good as him. I felt tears welling up, but I forced myself to stay calm. Jason, I never meant for you to hear that. It was a stupid, careless comment, and I hate that it hurt you so much. He shook his head. It's not just about hearing it. It's about knowing it's true for you. How am I supposed to be with someone who thinks I'm second best? You're not second best, I said, my voice rising slightly. Jason, I love you. You're the one I want to be with. That comment didn't mean what you think it did. Then what did it mean? He shot back, his eyes narrowing. Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty clear. I opened my mouth to respond, but found myself at a loss for words. How could I explain something that even I struggled to fully understand? It was just, I don't know, Jason. It was a moment of thoughtlessness. I was talking to Jess, and it just came out. It wasn't about how I feel about you. It was about my past. He laughed bitterly. Your past? That's exactly the problem, Mel. Your past is always hanging over us. And now it's like it's sitting in the middle of the room, between us, every single day. I don't want it to be like this, I whispered, feeling a lump in my throat. I'm trying, Jason. I'm trying so hard. And I'm tired of trying, he said quietly. I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough for you. I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if you're comparing me to him every time we're together. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. So what are you saying? You're giving up on us. Jason sighed deeply, looking down at his hands. I don't know if we can fix this, Mel. I don't know if I can ever get over it. I felt the tears spill over, running down my cheeks. Jason, please don't say that. We can get through this. We just need more time. I don't think time is going to fix this, he said softly. I think we've reached a point where we have to be honest with ourselves. Maybe we're holding on to something that's already broken. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. No, Jason, we can fix it. We just need to keep trying. He stood up, pacing the room. I don't know if I have anything left to give, Mel. I feel drained. I feel like I'm constantly fighting a battle I can't win. I stood up too, reaching out for him, but he stepped back, keeping the distance between us. Jason, please don't walk away from us. We've been through so much together. Don't let this be the end. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. I don't want to hurt you, Mel, but I can't keep living like this. It's tearing me apart. I felt like my world was crumbling around me. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason sighed again, his shoulders slumping. I think we need some time apart. Maybe some space will help us figure out what we really want. Those words felt like a knife to my heart. Time apart, I repeated, my voice shaking. Jason, I don't want to lose you. He reached out, brushing a tear from my cheek. I don't want to lose you either, Mel. But right now, I don't know how to stay. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, shattered. I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into my hands. The man I loved was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't think things could get worse after Jason walked out, but I was wrong, way wrong. He didn't just leave me emotionally wrecked. He left me financially ruined too. I never realized how much of our life together was held up by him until it all came crashing down. At first, I thought I could handle it. I told myself I'd find a way to move forward, even if it felt like my world was falling apart. But reality hit fast and hard. Jason had been the one managing most of the bills. Sure, I contributed, but he covered the bigger stuff. Rent, utilities, the car payments. I never really thought about it, because we were a team, but when he left, so did all that support. I remember the day I got the first overdue notice for the rent. My heart sank. I called the landlord, hoping to buy some time, but they weren't having it. "You're already a month behind," they told me. "If you can't pay by the end of the week, we'll have to start the eviction process." I felt like I was drowning. I tried to scrape together what little money I had, selling stuff online, taking on extra shifts at work, but it wasn't enough. And the hits kept coming. The car we shared, it was in his name. I came outside one morning to find it gone, repossessed. I was stranded, without a way to get to work or even run basic errands. Then there was the health insurance. I didn't even think about it until I needed to refill a prescription. I went to the pharmacy, only to be told my coverage had been canceled. Turns out Jason had been paying for that, too. Without it, I couldn't afford my meds, and my health started to spiral. The worst part, Jason wasn't answering my calls or texts. I tried reaching out, begging for a little help, just to get me through the month, but it was like I didn't exist to him anymore. I wasn't just losing the person I loved. I was losing everything we'd built together. People like to say karma always comes back around, but in this case, it felt like I was the one getting hit with it. I kept thinking back to that one stupid comment I made, the one that started it all. I never imagined it would cost me my relationship, my home, my stability, but here I was living the consequences. I ended up crashing on Jess's couch for a while after I got evicted. She tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was getting tired of having me around. I couldn't blame her. My life was a mess, and I didn't have a plan to fix it. One night, after another failed attempt to get in touch with Jason, I broke down. He took everything from me. I sobbed to Jess. I have nothing left. She hugged me, but there wasn't much she could say. I knew she wanted to help, but this was a mess only I could clean up. I had to find a way to stand on my own again, even if it felt impossible. I started looking for any job I could find, eventually landing a gig at a small cafe. It wasn't great, but it was something. I saved every penny I could, slowly trying to rebuild, but every step forward felt like I was dragging the weight of my mistakes behind me. Months passed, and things started to stabilize barely. I was living paycheck to paycheck, constantly stressed, but at least I wasn't homeless anymore. I still thought about Jason every day, though. Part of me hated him for leaving me in this mess, but another part of me knew it wasn't entirely his fault. I messed up and I had to own that. Looking back, I realize now how much I depended on him, not just financially, but emotionally too. Losing him made me confront parts of myself I didn't want to face. It forced me to grow, to figure out how to survive on my own. It wasn't easy, and I'm still a long way from where I want to be, but at least now I know I can do it. Karma hit me hard, no doubt about it, but maybe in a twisted way, it was what I needed to wake up, to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet, even when everything feels like it's falling apart.